Miyawaki was a renowned Japanese botanist who developed a method of afforestation in the 1970s that still bears his name today. Sadly, he passed away in July 2021, but he has left behind a lasting legacy which, if followed, could be one of the leading methods of saving the planet before it's too late. I first became aware of him almost 2 years ago when a friend of mine, John Kyberd, told me about a Japanese professor he had heard of and the wonderful method he had developed of growing forests much faster than any method developed before his research led him to what we now know as the Miyawaki Method. He learned his craft and honed that method that now bears his name while studying at a German university in the 1950s. On returning to his native Japan, he employed his forest planting method on behalf of large corporations and the Japanese government, later spreading his philosophy to other countries. In 2009, an Indian engineer, Shubhendu Sharma, met Professor Miyawaki, who had come to the Toyota factory where Sharma worked to plant one of his forests. Sharma was fascinated by Miyawaki and decided to volunteer to work with him to help place over 32,000 native trees and plants like neem, mango and teak into the otherwise industrial landscape. Soon he began creating his own Miyawaki forest in the backyard of his home, and in 2011, having proved to himself that Miyawaki's method could work in his own back garden, he quit his job with Toyota and started a forest production company, appropriately called Afforest, practicing what Miyawaki had preached. Since then, Sharma's company has planted over 450,000 trees in tiny, fast-growing forests in 50 cities worldwide, helping to improve global ecosystems' functionality one minute, power-packed patch at a time. Could the Miyawaki Method be the way to restore Ireland's lost woodland? Because, remember, once upon a time, 80% of Ireland was covered in trees, great forests stretching all across the island of Ireland. Today, this coverage is less than 11%. So, could a method developed by a Japanese botanist help with reforesting Ireland and help save the planet at the same time? Who knows? It just might. And it was with those thoughts in mind that my friend John set about developing an ambitious plan of rewilding areas of our hometown, Tala, with the prospect of spreading even further afield if successful. I'm pleased to say that John's dream is becoming a reality. He has laid down stepping stones for others to follow, and I'm pleased to say that they're coming in droves. But I let John himself take up the story from here.
Okay, John, just tell me how you first became aware of Professor Miyawaki and his method of growing mini forests very quickly.
Well, it goes back to the initial lockdown for COVID-19, just nearly 2 years ago, and we were locked down into a 5k radius, so we couldn't really go very far. So I spent a lot of time in this park, and I got a greater appreciation for the trees and just the wildlife that's here. And then I was doing a lot of study on the internet, and I came across Miyawaki. I can't remember how I came across him and his method of planting forests, and I just said, wow, that's really interesting. Didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it more than that. And then not too long after that, I was out here just down there. There were huge tractors and cutting equipment, and I said, what the hell's going on? They're spewing out all the CO2 to maintain an area of basically green desert. So putting Miyawaki's method into the frame, I said, why don't we just replace a lot of this lawn with these dense forests? I call them stepping stone forests. Because they are oases of biodiversity in the environment, and one leads to the other. I mean, there's real biodiversity. They look to be mostly native trees, and that's the Miyawaki method. And I was thinking, why doesn't the council just start planting that instead of trying to maintain this? And that's really where it came from.
Okay, John, I want you to tell me about the Miyawaki method, but more importantly from my point of view, where it actually fits into the overall scheme of things.
Well, the Miyawaki method, the key thing for me in it is that it's the density of the planting. So you plant a lot more trees and shrubs in an area than your typical classical method of planting forests. And given that we're in a climate emergency, the more trees that we can get into the ground, the more quickly, the better. And so that's why my proposal to the council and what I'm doing in the schools is to get trees planted in very dense fashion on areas of lawn that are really providing very little in terms of biodiversity or in terms of carpet storage.
Now, John, I want you to tell me another thing. Shubhendra Sharma, this Indian engineer who worked for Toyota, he has spread Miyawaki's method worldwide. How successfully do you think?
Sharma, he interned with Miyawaki in India, and he took the method, tried it in his own back garden, and it worked for him. And then he did it in other parts of India, he did it in parts of Malaysia, Indonesia. He's even been to Brazil and the United States. But the thing that was most interesting for me was when he brought it to Europe, which is kind of interesting because Miyawaki studied his method, honed his method in Germany, and Sharma brought it back into Holland with a company called IBM, who registered the trademark Tiny Forests. And they've done, I don't know, lots and lots of them, probably in the hundreds now at this stage. They received funding of 1.8 million from the Lotto in Holland to do it. So his methods came to Europe, and now they're being done in France, Belgium, the UK, Germany, and a couple in Ireland.
Tell me a little more about the Irish ones.
Leaf Ireland, which is part of Antashka, they have not actually used the Miyawaki method in its pure sense, but they've modified it, and they've done a number of forests down in Limerick, and I think some in Cork. And there's a group called Wolfgang Reforest, and they claim to have done the first Miyawaki forest in Ireland, and that's all I know of at the moment.
So at this stage, you have great plans. You've already gotten the council here in South Dublin to plant 3 of them here in Sean Walsh Park where we're standing. Plus, you've worked out a schools program. Tell me more about the schools program.
Yeah, the schools program, again, a bit like what Leaf Ireland are doing. It's not exactly the Miyawaki method, but it's very definitely heavily influenced and inspired by Miyawaki. And what we're doing is planting forests on school grounds. They're protected environments. Most of them in an Irish context have fences around them, so they're protected, and it also means then the children can access these forests right on their very doorstep, so they don't have to get onto a bus and travel to the very few native Irish forests that there are around. So it's going really well at the moment. We've got 10 schools signed up. We've done the soil preparation in 6 of them, and 4 more to go, and we'll do the planting in the spring of 2022.
Now, John, I want you to tell me, how did you first convince South Dublin County Council to become involved? And I suppose the second part of that question would be, how did you manage to get some of the sponsorship you have? Because I know you have some very special sponsors.
Well, in actual fact, there wasn't too much convincing to be done with the council. I had a contact who I just sent him brief details of the Miyawaki Method and said I'd be interested in doing something in the park if they were interested in it. And he came back to me very quickly and said, by coincidence, I have a couple of guys who have been looking at this method and will be interested in doing something. So that didn't take any convincing whatsoever. They were already on the case.
And the sponsorship?
The sponsorship, that's for the stepping stone for schools. My initial idea was that I would get individual companies to sponsor individual schools, forests and individual schools. So I approached, the very first one I approached was Tiger Reardon Motors, who's been a tremendous supporter of Tallaght Community Council, who's under whose auspices we're running the Stepping Stones Forest for Schools programme. And they willingly got on board. Next up was the Malden Hotel, and then there was the Henkel and Tallaght West Credit Union. While I was approaching individual companies, I'd also submitted an application to a community grants programme that Google run for Tallaght and Clondalkin. And to my surprise, we got a very significant chunk of money from them. And then I went back to Amazon Web Services, who have an entity called AWS in the communities, and they like to support community projects, and I knew this would be right up their street. And I asked them, did they want to get involved? And they did, and they matched the money that Google gave us. So we have two huge giants in the corporate world funding our forests in Tallaght.
John, I just want to expand on the Amazon people and the Google people, because I know I've been with you at some of these preparations for the forests in the schools, and I've noticed that a lot of people, workers from Google and Amazon, have come along. Do you want to tell me a little bit about how they became involved?
Yeah, that's one of the things that Amazon do, AWS do, that they encourage their staff to get involved in the community. So I was delighted when they asked me could they send volunteers along, because that made the job on the ground a hell of a lot easier. And they're a really enthusiastic bunch, and some of them are repeat offenders. They keep coming back for the next forest. They seem to enjoy it, and it's not exactly exciting work, you've seen it, but it's something that just seems to kind of catch the imagination. Up until the last forest, Google had a policy where they wouldn't allow their staff out into the community during the COVID restrictions. But now that pretty much everybody is vaccinated in Ireland, they're loosening that up. So we had a couple of Google volunteers on the last forest that we did.
And I also spoke to one of the guys from Henkel. Have they sent people along on a regular basis?
Well, they've sponsored one forest, and 5 of them turned up for that particular one. And I have to say, the feedback I got from them also was very, very positive.
It's a brilliant initiative, and we're delighted to be absolutely sponsoring it.
So you reckon Henkel will stay with this and maybe promote another one at some time in the future?
I hope so, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Just while we're on the point of volunteers, I noticed something you said to me when I interviewed you a couple of weeks ago about the wonderful work that the children actually do from all of the schools. Do you want to expand on that a little bit?
Oh yeah, I mean it's right up there, especially the young kids. They really enjoy it because it's kind of getting down and dirty with the wood chip mulch, also putting out the cardboard, even down to something as simple as taking the tape off the cardboard, because we don't want to put plastic down onto the planting area. They really get enthusiastically involved, and they love it, to the point where the headmaster in the last one had to nearly kind of get the shepherd's crook out to get some of them to come back into the classes. They just didn't want to leave it.
Well, believe it or not, I know you didn't notice, and neither did I, to be honest, but my darling granddaughter was one of the children involved in one of the schools. But the less said about that, the better.
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, the programme has been run under the auspices of Tallaght Community Council, and we agreed that we'd do 5 forests, and we advertised for 5 schools to come forward. We ended up with 10. We advertised in a local newspaper, The Echo, which has been a tremendous supporter of the programme, and we had no problems basically. Schools just came out and just said we want to get involved, and so it was just a matter of saying could we do 10 rather than the 5 that we'd originally planned. So we decided we'd take the 10 while they were going.
Absolutely fabulous. I'm delighted to see the response that you've had, and thankfully I've been around to witness most of the preparation work in the different schools. So the final question, John, how far do you think you can take this?
Well, I don't know about how far I can take it, but I think this is a program that has legs to travel right across the country. And to be quite honest with you, I'll be encouraging the likes of Amazon and Google, who are big sponsors for this, to take this initiative and bring it to other countries where they have a presence themselves. Irish schools are blessed because we have a lot of land around the schools in most cases. So there's no reason why every school that has space in Ireland shouldn't have its own little forest. Stepping stone forest.
Well, thanks again for watching Wildlife Wednesday, folks. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode, and if you did, I'd be grateful if you'd give it a like and subscribe to my channel. And when you do, don't forget to ring the bell so you're notified every time I upload new content. If you'd like to buy a copy of my safari book From Sunrise to Sunset, just follow the link below the video. Till next week, stay safe, stay healthy, wash your hands and wear a mask where necessary, while continuing to maintain social distancing, because we're not quite out of the woods yet. Even me. Take care, folks. Bye.